avec toi, chérie. La vie est belle. Bye-bye.
I've been working in your house 500 years. You never gave an Aboriginal a break. No way, you were cold-hearted mofo. Go down, just get on the floor, Bodie Voka. Hey, just get on the floor. Hey, Jody Voka. Dig that goal, dig that hole, bring that hoe, shuffle and bow, shoot that boy, snort that blow, barrel of smoke and whiskey, never gonna be enough. Dig that goal, dig that hole, bring that hoe, shuffle and bow, shoot that boy, snort that blow. You never ever done me no good. You a cold-hearted mofo. You a cold-hearted mofo. You a cold-hearted mofo. You said red like the bloodhound come running after me. I'm gonna kill him dead. Red light, I'm gonna kill him dead. Red light. Show us my name is Bo Diddley. I'm gonna kill that dog one day. Sinamori le sinamori, sinamori le sinamori, sinamori le sinamori. Fatumba yerele kini benato sinamori, kawado sinamori tamani yamori no sinamori. Fatumba yerele. Fatumba yerele kinyim benato sinamori, kawado sinamori dabari yeburima sinamori. Fatumba yerele. Fatumba yerele kinyim benato sinamori, ngawado sinamori dabari yeburima sinamori. Fatumba yerele.
Take me by the hand, show me the way I can go. Take me by the hand, show me the way.
Hello. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. If we can please start making way into the podium and make sure that everybody takes a seat. We're about to begin. Thank you.
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights still speaks to us all. Its 30 articles transcend values, cultures, and borders, declaring that we are all human and all equal in dignity and in rights.
In the 75 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we have seen many wins across the African continent. Despite these successes, the global anti-rights movement has increased the use of criminal law to discriminate against marginalized people and voices. Through the rise in populism and religious rhetoric that discards the fundamental values enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the civic space continues to shrink in Africa. The Southern Africa Litigation Center is bringing together human rights lawyers, academics, and activists to reflect on the extent at which fundamental principles of constitutionalism have been undermined. Join us on the 12th of December between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. in New York for a vibrant discussion on the impact of the anti-rights movement on grassroots activism in Africa. Help us find the solution to stem the anti-rights tide and reinvigorate the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This discussion will be streamed across our social media pages.
The ongoing impact of anti-rights and anti-gender campaigns, the real-time reversals, and community consequences. Progress has been hard-won in the ongoing struggle for equality and human rights. In November 2014, the High Court of Botswana ruled in favor of LGBTI advocacy group Blahabibo, finding that there had been a violation of the activists' rights to freedom of assembly, association, and expression. The government appealed the judgment to the Court of Appeal, another lasting tactic employed by the anti-rights movement that undermines progress and directly impacts LGBTIQ individuals on the ground. However, supporters of equal rights had this to say.
We are Botswana, we are part of the society, we'll be with you. Without us, Botswana cannot go anywhere.
Litigant Thuto Ramoge shed light on the lived experiences of those affected.
In the actual society, on the issues that I've experienced, I believe this is a revolution now. It means now I have a platform to raise my issues and be able to inspire other LGBTI out there to come out and be assisted.
Thuto unfortunately passed away before his dreams were realized.
Botswana's High Court has decriminalized same-sex relationships. Laws that punished gay sex with up to 7 years in prison were rejected as being unconstitutional. The courtroom erupted in clapping and excitement as the ruling was passed down. It comes less than a month after Kenya's High Court upheld its homophobic laws.
Unfortunately, the efforts of anti-rights and anti-gender campaigns persistently undermine these advancements, causing a continuous regression and actively seeking to reverse the achievements made in recognizing and protecting the rights of marginalized groups, particularly the LGBTIQ community.
our colleagues, our fellow citizens who identify themselves as homosexuals. But we are saying the grace of God is sufficient to help you change.
But we believe the issue is so fundamental, so fundamental to the nature and the fabric of our society, that it is a matter that we really believe that the determination must be made by the vast majority of our people.
These campaigns are fueled by misinformation and disinformation, led by religious leaders and politicians.
Demonstrations took place in the streets of Botswana's capital Gaborone on Saturday against legislation to make same-sex relations legal. Mostly religious groups marched across the city to voice their opposition to a bill aiming to comply with the 2019 court ruling in favour of LGBTQ rights.
Different demonstrations against law reform took place in various towns across Botswana. The sudden backlash coincided with similar anti-rights movements in Kenya, Malawi, Namibia, and Uganda. The tactics ranged from legislative pushbacks to social media misinformation, creating an environment of hostility and eroding the hard-fought victories for equality. Grassroots movements and solidarity networks rallied together, standing against these harmful campaigns. In Botswana, this resulted in the minister withdrawing the proposition to debate the amendment of the bill in Parliament.
I beg to defer the Penal Code Amendment Bill number 29 of 2022.
Though the anti-rights and anti-gender campaigns persist in attempting to roll back progress, not only in Botswana but across Africa, the determination and unity of communities on the ground remains steadfast. The tangible setbacks experienced by communities, from denied rights to increased discrimination, emphasize the urgent need for support networks, advocacy, and solidarity efforts to counter these regressive campaigns and collective action to safeguard human rights and promote inclusion.
Thank you so much for paying attention to our lovely video. Welcome and good morning, everyone. And I'd like to say a good evening to everyone who's watching us on our social media pages back at home, across the continent of Africa. My name is Melusi Simelane, and I am the Civic Rights Program Manager at the Southern Africa Litigation Center. You know, despite the vibrant democracies and the activist spirit in Africa, we're facing a lot of challenges, and that is why we are here today to discuss these issues. We're trying to find a way in which we can use the UDHR to move forward the conversation of safeguarding liberties and rights, particularly of those who are in the margins. But without any further ado, can I please invite to the stage Annika, who is the Executive Director of the Southern Africa Litigation Center.
Good morning, good evening, everyone. It's just really nice having you all here, and thank you so much for coming. I think thank you giving us the chance to present our case for you and speak a bit about what's happening on our side of the world. And it's an honor for us, I think, as an organization, that you have all taken the time and effort to come and be with us today. To just say a little bit about our organization, we started in 2005. We are based in South Africa, but we actually litigate throughout Africa, and we have been involved in a number of legal successes that has really challenged issues going from same-sex marriages, as you saw in the same-sex relationships, as you saw in the video, to same-sex marriages in Namibia, to customary laws that have been ruled unconstitutional in various countries in our region. And you'll hear a bit today about some of the other cases as well. What we want to emphasize with this discussion that we're going to have today is that ourselves, like many of the other organizations that have been attending the event over the past few days, we're small organizations, but we're dedicated to what we do. We don't have a lot of resources, but we try and pack a punch with the resources that we do have. And with that small resources and dedicated staff, we have managed to have a number of successes and in slightly moving the needle forward on human rights throughout Africa. And as activists, I think all of us who have been working in this field, I think for all of us, the changes that have been happening are scary, to put it that way. We are frustrated by the increased hostility that there is on a range of human rights issues, not just LGBTQI rights or reproductive rights, but women's rights. The rights of activists to even be able to protest is constantly being challenged in all our regions. And I know we deal with those same challenges across the world, and many of you deal with that on a daily basis, but perhaps in this discussion we would like to focus a bit closer to home on what's happening in Africa. You will see there's if you scan the QR code that was in a holding slide in the beginning of the meeting, you'll get a sense of the sort of rights discussions that are happening and the anti-rights discourse that is really all over our region. And you're welcome to sort of add on to that code, to that platform if you want to say anything. Sorry, jet lag is really killing me at the moment. So the interesting thing, although we're celebrating UDHR 75 at the moment and at this meeting, in Africa, the UDHR started a lot later. I mean, most of our countries were colonized and only gained independence in the late 60s, some even more recently until the 90s. So for us, the UDHR was only entrenched in our constitutions more recently. Many people still don't know what's in those constitutions, and definitely it's not something that's debated or out there in the public discourse to the extent that it should be. But what we do know about is we know about policing, we know about law enforcement, because all the colonial sort of institutions that were there before there were human rights in our countries have stayed there, and they continue to be used more than anything else. So the discourses in our countries are not about rights. They're about enforcing the law, criminalizing anything we don't like, and using those sort of hard stick methods to deal with any sort of opposition and anyone who just chooses to be different for whatever reason. So as things become more and more polarized, I think, throughout the world, what happens often is that the difficulties faced by some countries in the world and some regions in the world sort of get marginalized a bit more. So what happens in Africa often stays in Africa, and no one really talks about it, except for the activists on the continent who really tries hard to deal with things as they are. So although we celebrate the UDHR, I think we do so with mixed feelings. And at this event, what we want to showcase is the strength of civil society in Africa. And there's a lot of organizations who are doing amazing work. Many of the organizations who will be speaking today are the founders of the global campaign to decriminalize poverty, status, and activism. It's a campaign that started in Africa that has huge successes throughout the continent and has rallied numerous communities and organizations around that call. And you're welcome to join it, and we'll show you later the slide to the link to the website. But so although there is that campaign, I think what we want to ask is from people is that we are vibrant civil society in Africa. What we need is your support to be able to do what we do, and solidarity. And that's really what we're asking today. And we want you to debate and feel free to ask whatever questions you want to ask from the people who are here and the challenges they are facing, so that we can speak more about how we find universal solutions to what we're all dealing with. So I'll leave it at that and hand over to Malusi. Thanks, Malusi.
I'm so glad Annika has actually mentioned the fact that we are all jet lagged, so please do forgive us. I mean, my body is like literally shaking. It's 6 p.m. at home. I'm supposed to be having a smooth drink right now. So I know my face looks a lot pretty, and I mean, I could stand here the entire midday, but no, it's not about me. I will allow... Did I push it too far? No, listen, I would like now at this moment to invite our panelists who are actually the people who are going to be having a conversation with us today. I will start by introducing Ben Hunt, who is the global correspondent for Vice News. And he's an investigative journalism and does stories around LGBTQ people from across the world. Previously, Ben was at the BBC and he was the very first LGBTQ correspondent. And before becoming the BBC Words correspondent, in June 2023, Ben has actually won the Out d'Or Foreign Press Award in France for his investigations into transphobia at the Equality and Human Rights Commission. In 2022, Ben was listed in Forbes 30 under 30, so he's a very young man, everyone. Way younger than me, I must add. And actually, he has took the top spot in The Guardian and the Diva magazine's Pride Power list, as well as the being named One Young World's Journalist of the Year. So Ben, if you can please join us on stage. I will also invite, sorry, I'm trying to get the right one. Yes. I'm also going to invite to the stage the wonderful Chikondi Chijozi. She's a colleague of mine from the Southern Africa Litigation Center. She's the youngest chairperson of the Malawi Human Rights Commission, I must add, and she currently heads the Criminal Justice Program at the Southern Africa Litigation Center. She's widely recognized for constitutional court victories, which have successfully challenged mass police arrest, police abuse, detention, children in prison, police stations. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Chikondi Chijozi. I will also yes, please. I would also love to invite to the stage Dr. Adrian Juko. Dr. Adrian is an award-winning Ugandan human rights lawyer and lecturer at the Makerere University. Is it Makerere? Yes. It's Makerere University. He's a devoted activist, and he's a founder and executive director of the Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum, which provides legal services and advocacy to marginalized people in Uganda. So now, as you're well aware of the Anti-Homosexuality Act in Uganda, so he's the guy to look out to if you want to do work around that. He has actually also been, he has successfully challenged vagrancy offenses in Uganda and obtained damages for LGBTQ individuals targeted during the arrest during the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. Adrian. And I would like to, I know we are behind time and I'm trying to wrap up my words as fast as I can with the jet lag killing me. I should like to also invite to the stage Ms. Liesel, who is actually a South African human rights lawyer who began her career in post-apartheid South Africa, working with the Human Rights Commission and Commission on Gender Equality. As head of the HIV litigation unit at the AIDS Law Project and director of the Tswaranang Legal Advocacy Center, she has led strategic litigation for people with HIV, women facing violence. She has worked for Human Rights Watch, directing the Women's Rights Division and overseeing global human rights issues. She is currently the inaugural director of Penn Barbie Freedom to Right Center. I'm telling you, it's a powerhouse. We have also Dr. Kapia John, who is actually a distinguished author and professor at the St. John's University College in Zambia and Boston University. He serves as the rector at the Christ Church Episcopal. I'm sorry. There you go. I'm glad there are religious people in the room. I was just checking. Dr. Kawama produced a report entitled Globalizing the Culture of Wars, U.S. Conservatives, African Churches, and Homophobia that promoted invitations to testify before the United States Congress and the United Nations. He has been outspoken against anti-LGBTQ and reproductive rights activists who spread their hateful ideology across the continent. Dr. Kapia. And last but not least, we have Jessica Stan, who is actually appointed by President Biden to serve as the special envoy for LGBTQ human rights, and she spearheads the U.S. efforts to combat global violence and discrimination against LGBTQ people. She formerly led the Outright International and played a vital role in the UN resolution on gender identity and sexual orientation. Widely recognized figure, she taught the first LGBTQ rights course at Columbia University, my alma mater. Hey. I'm a lion. Jessica Stan. At this moment, I will hand over to Ben because he does this best and he knows how to do these sort of things. And I'm too pretty to stand here.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Appreciate that. Hello, everyone. How are you doing? You're good? So my aim with all of these, we all go to a lot of conferences, I'm sure you do as well as I do. My aim is to keep you awake, yes, but also involved. So I want this to be as interactive as possible. We've got a very good Q&A section at the end. Hopefully we'll have enough time for it. But I want you to start thinking about questions, comments that you have, and then we will get onto those. Before I do kick off, I just want to say thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. This is an absolutely incredible panel. As Maluti said, I started off at the BBC as their first LGBT correspondent, which was a very interesting time, working for a public service broadcaster, navigating what LGBT rights means globally. Very quickly, I realized that I was the glitter and rainbows correspondent for the BBC. I was out here just preaching a good word about gay stuff internationally, which is wonderful. But then things changed. And we suddenly saw a government switch in the UK. And with Theresa May leaving, Boris Johnson coming in, we suddenly saw that actually the work that they were doing to try and push LGBT rights was suddenly slipping away. And suddenly not only were they working or not working for LGBT rights, they started working against LGBT rights. And that's where we find ourselves now. So a couple of years ago, I did move to Vice News, which is an organization which actually challenges governments very nicely. We love America. And it is very good to be able to travel the world with Vice now and expose injustices where it comes to LGBTQ rights internationally. Journalism can only exist because people tell us stuff, and this is just my plea to all of you. If you're working for organizations doing incredible work, please tell the world about it. Please do get in touch with me. My contact details will be somewhere here, and do speak about the work that you're doing. Because as we'll hear today on this panel, so many people are doing incredible, incredible things, but their voice just isn't reaching the audiences that it should. So please allow me to help you to do that. And with that being said, Chikondi, as a human rights litigator involved in various successful cases to decriminalize poverty and status, I want to hear about your experiences of the impact of the anti-rights rhetoric on courts and parliaments on the African continent, please.
Thank you so much, Ben. My name is Chikondi Chijozi. I'm based in Malawi. I work for Southern Africa Litigation Center. I started doing this work when I was 19, and when I started that work, I was quite excited with the prospects when you look at what the law provides and the potential of changing the situation of many vulnerable people in the countries that we work with. And we made changes. We're excited and happy looking at Rastafarian children who were denied to go into government schools just because of their dreadlocks. Seeing that the courts upholding their rights and allowing them to go into schools, and seeing the LGBTI movement grow in Malawi and other countries that we work in Botswana, in Eswatini, and all the successes that we've seen in Botswana, the registration of Regabibo, the decriminalization of homosexuality, that brought a lot of joy to us and say there's hope for Africa. But what we've seen now of late is the change that has come with the anti-rights movement, where the independence of the judiciary is under attack, where the progress that we've made over the years now is being taken away by legislation that is being enacted to undo everything that the courts have done. So we have seen, the good example is Uganda, Namibia, and even in Malawi, as we're all still litigating in the country on decriminalization of homosexuality. And there's already threat to enact laws that would actually make the situation worse. And even in some cases, we've seen Parliament hijacking the legal process whilst the case in court. A good example is when we were doing a case on criminalization of adolescent sex, children who engage in sexual activity at adolescent age. And we were saying we cannot criminalize children for doing what is normal at that age. And before the case could progress in court, it was already hijacked by the legislatures introducing laws in Parliament that essentially cut that process for the court to actually vindicate the rights of adolescent children. So it's something that we're seeing not only in Malawi, where I work from, but also in many other countries that we're working in. And I'm very happy that we have people here, Victor and Rob, who are on the ground, who can give like practical examples of how this is happening in the work that they're doing for Victor in Malawi and for Rob in the US. And Victor, I would invite you just to highlight some of the success strategies that you've done in Malawi to counter the anti-rights narrative, also in terms of the campaign to decriminalize poverty and status.
Yeah, Take the podium. Come on, let's do it. Here we go.
Thank you very much. My name is Victor Muhango. I'm the Executive Director for an organization called the Center for Human Rights Education, Advice and Assistance in Malawi. Let me start by saying that Malawi and some other countries in Africa, they were once colonized by the Britain. And they left us laws that actually discriminates the locals. It is unfortunate that some years after independence, we are still having laws that were left by our colonial masters. We are claiming that we are independent, but we are still using those laws that were left by our colonial masters. These are the laws that never went to parliament to be debated by Malawian parliament. Our colonial masters changed them, improved them, removed them, but we are still clinging to these laws. Probably because there's an aim behind that. The aim behind is to make sure that the poor should not be close to the rich. To make sure that the sex workers, LGBTI, should not be close to the rich. So it's very unfortunate. As an organization, together with Southern Africa Education Center, we have tried within our means to challenge some of the laws. We challenged some provisions like log and vagabond. That was actually criminalizing the citizens for working at night, not just working at night because they're failing to get money to board a bus. They are coming from the hospitals. So they were being arrested in masses. And in the process, some police officers took advantage of them and started soliciting. If they're women or sex workers, they were actually asking for sex. So we challenged one provision in our penal code. But that was not enough. We saw so many things happening. Now, we realized that the police, they're also using sweeping exercise as just sweeping, arresting, and willy-nilly people in the street. So my organization, Claire and SAC, we went ahead and challenged the practice of sweeping people. They called sweeping exercise. What they were doing is that the president is going to the city. They'll make sure that they sweep all poor people in the streets. You can now relate that it's the same tactics done by our colonial masters. So the locals, our people, they're also doing the same. They just need them when it comes to the time of voting. So this is what was happening in Malawi. But we are still in court as we are talking. We are also challenging the begging. There's a law whereby it criminalizes begging. So we have so many cases, offenses in our penal code that needs to be challenged. But we are trying within our means. The problem is that maybe we cannot manage. We just need support from people to support our campaign so that we can proceed challenging all these laws. We have also managed to empower the grassroots to make sure that they can challenge the law on their own, because as an organization, we cannot manage to reach out to each and every individual. Thank you.
So thank you. My name is Rob Robinson, and I'm a longtime volunteer and a senior advisor with an organization called Partners for Dignity and Rights, based here in New York City. It's a human rights-based organization that works in 4 particular areas: the human right to housing, the human right to health care, the human right to work with dignity, and the human right to education. Let me share with you, if you don't know my bio, I spent 2.5 years homeless on the streets of Miami and 10 months in a New York City homeless shelter. And one of the things while I was on the streets of Miami, I learned that I came up with this theory that people always challenge me. How did you get this theory? And that theory was this, that gentrification leads to displacement, which leads to homelessness, which leads to criminalization. And when I first came into organizing, I was told that you can't work with the legal community, policymakers, and academics. I would argue those are the folks that have me on stage today. And my relationship with the Southern African Litigation Conference is kind of amazing, because for folks on the other side of the globe to pick you to speak at their particular conference in New York is amazing. I think it's pretty cool, and I'm still like last night I spent a lot of time, how did I end up here? But it's pretty cool, and I was involved in a piece of case law here in the United States called Martin versus Boise. It was a criminalization done in Idaho of an anti-camping ordinance. That criminalization took us and the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty and a pro bono law firm all the way to Geneva, to the Human Rights Commission in Geneva, to argue our case, came back to the U.S., and we ended up in the U.S. Court of Appeals. The Ninth Circuit voted in favor of us, and it was an anti-camping ordinance. And we saw that criminalization is something that's happening all over the place. I have a friend in the audience here from Miami, where in that city they're trying, because people are trying to be humanitarians and feed homeless people in the street, they're trying to criminalize that act. So it's important that we collaborate around the world, right? I learned from my comrades in South Africa that we need to elevate the voices of people directly impacted. They need to lead the conversation. So my job as an activist and an organizer is to go into the communities and bring the information that I have from around the world. I'm blessed to work all around the world, particularly in South Africa and Brazil. Strong relationship with Abashali, the shack dwellers movement in South Africa, a very radical movement and progressive movement who are fighting for human rights and dignity, which is important. And then there's another litigation center called CIRI, the Socioeconomic Rights Initiative, which I have a strong relationship, because it was through that group that I saw a film called Dear Mandela. And I saw a 14-year-old warrior from that Abashali organization pounding his chest in that film saying, I have the human right to a home, and it's written in this Constitution. He's showing a book of the Constitution. And I committed myself saying, if that young man can stand up for human rights, so can I. And it's important for me to learn from that 14-year-old, and that's what I've done. I've connected with that group, bringing their voices into the UN, because I have access to the UN at pretty high level. You bring their voices into the UN, and you fight here on the ground in New York to support their issues, because we have what they call these organizations that sit here, the consulates. It's a very easy access for me to bring a group of people to support their struggles in South Africa. So I thank you all for being here, and I thank the Southern African Leadership Conference for bringing me here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. I'd like to switch to speak to Adrian now about Uganda. So the nation faces some of the harshest laws, some of the harshest sentences for individuals just trying to do what we see as the right thing. Could you tell us a bit more about what's going on there, please?
Thank you so much, Ben. I have some good news and some bad news from Uganda. The good news is that the Constitutional Court is finally going to hear our petitions challenging the Homosexuality Act on Monday. That's a good thing. Let us hope for the best that the law is nullified. The bad news is challenging that law is actually a criminal act in itself. Wow. And the NGO Bureau has made that clear to us, that the fact that we went to court to change that law is actually criminal, and it may make us lose our license as an organization. And that's where I come in on this conversation. Like, how as a lawyer do you continue doing this work when you are also a criminal, when you're criminalized? As lawyers, we rely on confidence. You tell your client that I will get you out of this situation. In my country right now, the lawyer himself, by doing that, that is actually criminalized, more especially when it comes to LGBT persons. And that's a huge, huge challenge in how we do our work. We made a decision, which was conscious, that we are going to continue breaking the law. We are going to give the services until maybe they declare that that is unconstitutional, that the Constitutional Court, and then we shall figure out what to do next in those circumstances. Civic space continues to narrow in my country, as an organization, you wonder what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen to you? Like I've said, we've been visited by the NGO Bureau, questioning us about our work. Right now, we are supposed to come up for renewal of our license. Just the process of getting your license renewed takes about, I don't know how many different steps you have to do, including clearance by intelligence authorities and the army and all sorts of people, just to go to apply to the NGO Bureau to have your license renewed. And of course, when you have a record like ours, it's even when you manage to go through all those hurdles, then really worry if you'll be able to get your license renewed, because we are supposed to do this every 3 years to get our license renewed as an NGO. And criminalization of allyship, like not just lawyers, but those who give legal services, who give medical services, who give all sorts of services. We work with different groups. You've heard about our campaign to decriminalize poverty. You now can't bring together the groups of, let us say, sex workers, injecting drug users, let us say people who work on the streets, to work with LGBT people, because that allyship is right now criminalized. So when you split the groups, and also funding, okay, like funders are also criminalized. Like if you fund LGBT in Uganda, under the law, basically that's also criminalized. So how do you maintain a movement when you have criminalization that's happening to allies of your movement? And what this also done, if you look at all these things, fighting for survival, having to work to do your usual work of representing people in courts every single day, you have to challenge this law in court. As you also try to look for funds in this environment, what happens is that you are spread so thin that you even cease being effective. Every single day is just a fight for survival. And this is the impact of these laws. Some people think that just because people may not be arrested every single day, organizations are not arrested, or activists are not actually put in prison, that maybe there's no impact of this law. The fact that you can't run anywhere, like there's nowhere to go to. These days we've become, I don't know what we've become as lawyers. Like we are lawyers who can't give you a remedy, essentially. You come to me saying I've been beaten because I'm gay, and the question is, what do you want me to do for you? Right? Like I can't go to the police, because if I go to the police to report your case, then the fact that you are gay is already problematic. The fact that I'm a lawyer working on a gay client is already problematic in that respect. So as lawyers, we become also, in a way, useless. Like, look at yourself as unable to help your client. The only thing we've resorted to doing right now is trying to help with what we call security money. The only solution we are giving to clients is relocation. Move away from where you are and go somewhere else. Thank you, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, and I'm sure we'll get into more of this during the Q&A. I would love to know how you're feeling about some of those things that you were talking about. I think it's very easy for us in conferences just to talk factually about what's going on without actually just deepening. Like, well, what does it actually feel like to be in that situation? So thank you for sharing that, Adrian. Liesl, I'm going to turn to you now, because we know that these kind of challenges aren't exclusive to Uganda. They're happening across the African continent and many places around the world as well. Can you tell me about the incarceration of writers on the continent, please?
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to Annika and Malusi and Salk. It's such an honor to be part of this very distinguished panel, and I'm going to try to keep to my 3 minutes, not least of all because Malusi is sitting directly in my outline. PEN America is an organization that sits at the intersection of human rights and literature, so I hope, Ben, you'll indulge me if I start by reading a few lines from a poem by Dr. Rafat Al-Arir, who is a Palestinian poet, writer, and academic who was killed last week during an Israeli airstrike. If I must die, you must live to tell my story. If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a tale. So PEN America, as I said, sits at the intersection of literature and human rights, and we monitor and track the persecution of writers, poets, playwrights, and increasingly members of the creative community, artists, actors, songwriters, because we, and I was grateful, Malusi, that you read out my biography, because one of the things that I wanted to say is that I spent a lot of my life working in more traditional human rights advocacy and activism. And so the work that I do at Penn has really helped me begin to think about another category of human rights defenders or human rights enforcers, the better language. And the role that writers and artists and members of the creative community play, firstly in helping us imagine a world where your job is not needed, and a world that is different. And I think that for me as a human rights advocate, that work has really been important, because I think being able to imagine, being able to see a world where people can live in full dignity, where their rights are not at risk, is a really important part of sustaining human rights advocacy and activism. And so the work that my team does is to document the risks that writers and poets, public intellectuals, academics, the risks that they face for advancing free expression. And we have a database that has over 1,000 entries of writers all over the world who face persecution, imprisonment, transnational repression, torture, beatings, all for what they write and what they speak. Something that is protected in the UDHR and a range of other regional and international human rights conventions. Free expression is one of the foundational human rights. Uganda is a place where a number of writers have been imprisoned for what they've said. We know people like Stella Nyanzi, who live in exile. There are writers and journalists imprisoned in Liberia, in Burundi, in Zimbabwe. And so I think as we think about allyship, we think about how we build a movement that recognizes the full humanity. I think we have to work with the creative community. We have to work with them to tell our stories, to tell the stories of the people who are not able to be here today. But fundamentally, I think that at the heart of some of this work lies the ability for us to see the humanity in each other, and that is the role that writers and poets and artists play. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Kramer, I'm going to come directly to you if that's okay. I would just love to understand more about how some of these discourses that we've been discussing do actually manifest within the African continent, please.
Thank you. Just want to start by saying some of the things we overlook when we talk about Africa. The majority of Africans identify as religious one or another. That's the starting point. And the split currently is between Islam and Christianity. Both of them, they claim, in fact, about equal numbers of the 1.2 billion we have. And very few would claim to be traditionalists. So these two religions, Christianity and Islam, are global religions. I think that's what we forget when we're talking about these issues. When I go to Kenya, I don't need to find a person to introduce me to Christianity because I know how the Christian church looks like. So I can walk in there. When I come to America, the same thing. I'll find a sister denomination here. This is different from the human rights work because you don't just enter. They have to understand who you are, what you're standing for, before they can allow you. So with the religious movements, both Islam and Christianity, they also have another benefit, which has to do with the organizing power. They have a dedicated following. On every Friday or every Sunday, people go to churches. And that's where this whole thing begins, because the battle is being fought in mosques and in churches. What I mean by that is, we always want to view politicians as, these African politicians specifically, as lunatics. They are not. They want political support. Even though what they mean by democracy, I don't know. But they want to hear that people are voting for them. So they know the easiest target in this case is this creature they have created, the LGBT person who is a monster with horns coming after your children. In terms of human rights, we have to understand the religion is protected under human rights declarations. So is culture, all right? So when Africans use, or African opposition to anti-human rights agenda uses terms like, we are defending Africa. In fact, they claim to be human rights advocates themselves because they are quoting the same document that we quote, all right? And the UN itself has been struggling. They don't know what to do with what they said when they were founded and what it means today. So the family, when we talk about the family, what we are thinking of is only mother, child. In Africa, it becomes even worse. Traditional family sounds like my great-grandmother, my brother, my uncle, my what. So when they stand up and say, we are trying to defend African traditional values, here in America, we know what they mean. But in Africa, it sounds somewhat differently, so they have gotten that advantage. But this was another angle. When I wrote that report in 2009, the focus was highly on the American evangelicals. What we are seeing on the continent now is a shift in the strategy. Partially is a response to what CCR did when they took Scott Library to court. The right has learned something. So whenever they are going to campaign, they are not campaigning the way they used to do, where you just see two white people in a conference. They are going to sit with African voices, and among them will be Roman Catholic bishops. Now, I know most of us loved Pope Francis, but if you go through his writings, if there's something he has constantly attacked, is this gender ideology. Whether he's writing about the environment, he comes back to this question. So it's one thing for me to say, I can call Sharon Slater as a crazy woman, but I wouldn't call Pope Francis as a crazy woman, or a crazy man. He has respect. They have the UN vote, which they do use every time to try and stop the advancements in human rights. So in short, what I'm trying to say is, Africa is now witnessing a new phase when it comes to the human rights for LGBTQ plus people and for women's rights. There is this marriage between the Vatican, the Muslims, our leaders, the imams, and of course, the evangelicals. And the only thing they would say is, if we are doing this, we are protecting religion, we are protecting our culture. We have to change how we look at it also. That's why I always tell people, call me Reverend Kapia, because I don't want to cede my religion to one group. We do have values too, and we have to stand up and say, what they are doing is wrong. But it's not one person we have to target. We have to go beyond the established movement of the US evangelicals, because when they're in Africa now, they'll be seated next to a Roman Catholic bishop, and the Roman Catholic bishops are the ones who are calling for the arrest of LGBT persons. Whilst Pope Francis continues to make his claims, just this March, this year he called what we are talking about here, the LGBT rights, in terms of his very opposed to trans issues. He said it's the worst colonization we are witnessing in the world. So we have the Pope to talk about here, not just the evangelicals.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Jessica, I'm coming to you. Now, you've been in the game for a while. You've been working to advance LGBT rights internationally. Can we talk about international partners and the role that you see that they play within all of this?
We can.
Let's do it. Want to use the podium? Go for it, go for it.
I accidentally dropped the mic, so I'm going to call that a mic drop. Thank you, Malusi. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you. And thank you so much to Annika, Malusi, and Pamela, and everyone from the Southern African Litigation Center for the invitation to be here today. I just want to start out by acknowledging the significance of the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document that states all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. I think it always has to be said that this also includes LGBTQI plus persons around the world. And it pains me that 75 years after the establishment of the UDHR that we're still making that argument. So we know that there's a lot of work yet to be done to realize its promise, but there's an incredibly strong and intersectional foundation to build upon, for which I am very grateful. So Ben and Salk asked me to speak a little bit about backlash. And so I want to engage with that question by asking, why do we see such serious backlash against LGBTQI plus movements around the world? And I want to make an argument to you that part of the reason for the instrumentalization of LGBTQI plus people's lives is because our movement is winning. Of course, we know that the anti-rights movement is pushing hard, but I think they're attacking LGBTQI plus persons because we are destabilizing the status quo. We are increasingly visible. We are ending the unacceptable standards that many of us have spent our lives living with. And because we are convenient scapegoats, distracting from other core human rights abuses, poverty, and corruption. Just think for a moment about the changes that you've seen over your own lifetimes. And you know that our progress has been real and our progress threatens them. So I want to give some examples of success. Once, our organizations were underground, but increasingly today, LGBTQI groups are visible. When they try to silence us, we sue for legal recognition, and we win. So kudos to Legabibo in Botswana as one example, who we saw in the beautiful video earlier, and Nigelhurk in Kenya as inspiration. Our movements are increasingly mastering complex parliamentary procedures, assisted by organizational experts, and finding the legal tools to block discriminatory campaigns. So in Ghana, for example, the anti-LGBTQI plus bill received a second reading in Parliament, and we don't know how this struggle will end. But the movement has won time to organize, to coordinate, and to defend itself, and even build new organizations and alliances. And building off of what Kapia said, just 2 weeks ago, the Catholic bishops in Ghana spoke up, reversing their position and now stating that LGBTQI plus persons in Ghana should not be criminalized. That did not happen in a vacuum. That was the result of activism. And we also see progress in the court. In August, I attended the Pan-African ILGA conference in Mauritius and spoke about decriminalization with activists and with the government. And so it was a thrill to see the decision that Mauritius decriminalized homosexuality in October. And I don't know if you read the court's ruling, but it stated in unequivocal terms that the colonial era sodomy law did not reflect Mauritian values. So moving from our successes, I want to talk a little bit about some of the myths that we hear about LGBTQI plus people. I think the truth is that the more we become visible, the more anti-rights actors are exposed. And we know their lies. Many of us, when we came out, may have even struggled against their lies ourselves. So let me name a few of them. One that we hear frequently is that LGBTQI plus people are pedophiles. This is false. Most child molesters target children of their friends and family, tragically, and the majority of child molesters are men married to women. But if we look more deeply at the structures that tolerate child sexual abuse, we know that we have to engage with the realities of patriarchy, child abuse, the disregard for the views of children, and the acceptance of sexual and gender-based violence. Those are the root causes of pedophilia, not LGBTQI+ persons. A second myth that we hear is that LGBTQI+ rights are special rights. That is also false. As the UDHR states, all human beings are born equal, free and equal in dignity and rights. And to be clear, when we demand recognition of our dignity, we demand no more nor less than heterosexual or cisgendered persons, simply to be treated as human. It can be difficult to talk about the lies that are said about LGBTQI people. It's not fun to say them out loud, especially in a room of survivors and experts like this one. But I think we need to state the lies so that we engage more substantially in how to counter them. So I want to build off of Adrian's point and look a little bit at Uganda as a case study of both the lies and the response. So take that second myth, LGBTQI+ rights are special rights, and turn it on its head. In fact, supporting the human rights of LGBTQI+ persons does not diminish the rights of others, but actually may expand their rights by demonstrating the need for protections for those who are vulnerable. So let me give you some examples from Uganda and the AHA. Uganda held an election in 2021 that was violent and marred by irregularities. And shortly thereafter, the US government announced a visa restriction policy targeted at those who were responsible for undermining the democratic process and urged the government of Uganda to hold them accountable. Then in 2023, Ugandan LGBTQI human rights defenders called the world's attention to the Anti-Homosexuality Act. But significantly, those very activists did not say, we want special rights for ourselves. They said that to understand the Anti-Homosexuality Act and the targeting of LGBTQI people, every Ugandan's human rights would have to be respected. It's good to applaud for good things, absolutely. But what's really important, and this was, I think, one of the questions that Ben and Sal put to us, is do governments listen when civil society speaks? In this context, I'm happy to say that Ugandan activists articulated their asks so clearly that it became easy to take seriously their recommendations, and we translated their views into policy. Let me give you 3 quick examples. Last week, when Secretary Blinken announced that the United States was expanding the US's visa restriction in Uganda to also include repression of marginalized or vulnerable populations, he explicitly mentioned a wide array of vulnerable individuals, including environmental activists, journalists, human rights defenders, and marginalized populations, yes, including but not limited to LGBTQI+ persons. Let me give you another example. When Ambassador Tai, the US trade representative, announced that President Biden had terminated Uganda's eligibility for the African Growth and Opportunity Act, she noted that the decision was based on gross violations of internationally recognized human rights, including but not limited to the AHA. And when the United States released a business advisory to illuminate the potential risks to conducting business in Uganda, it identified the AHA as increasing restrictions on human rights, including freedom of expression in the broader environment, including but not limited to the targeting of LGBTQI people. So when you hear that LGBTQI people are only fighting for themselves and only asking for special rights, you know that the data doesn't support that allegation. I want to wrap up by giving one more example of how we address the myths. So go back to that first myth that LGBTQI+ persons are predators. The anti-rights movement is turbocharged when they speak about the protection of children, and rightly so, because children need to be protected. And the parents in this room know that there is nothing that a parent won't do to protect their child. But when the predator lie takes root, truth struggles to triumph. And the reason for that is grounded in how we as human beings develop our ideas and beliefs, either maintain or discard them. The most fundamental beliefs are grounded in limbic emotions, the sort of lizard parts of the brain beneath rational consciousness. Limbic emotions like fear and anger and happiness and love cannot be countered with rationality. You cannot argue someone into loving you. But we can call on all of those emotions to advance respect for our human rights. When anti-rights actors call us predators, they're deploying fear and anger. And every parent immediately thinks, not my child. So how do we counter these myths? We must respond with love. Parents who love their LGBTQI+ kids see through these lies. So too can siblings and grandparents and cousins and friends. So to defeat the backlash, we must broaden and deepen our network of allies and advocates. When we can come out to those who love us, to ask for their support, and to activate those powerful emotions to our benefit. Think about it. Love is our superpower. And so I'll just end by saying, I think that there's one thing that LGBTQI people have learned, and that is to love ourselves and to love each other. And therefore, love is one resource that is abundant in this movement. And so I look forward to discussing how we can deploy love to lift us all up. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I mean, with that mic drop, I don't know what more I can say on this stage. Thank you so much to the fellow panelists. I think what I'm here on the stage to do right now is to open the conversation back to the room. I do have a couple of people that I would like to, I think in Eswatini we call it colloquially the bulala system. Well, it directly translates to killing, but it doesn't literally mean killing. It just means like asking you to speak without your consent. So so I'd like to open the floor to the room if there are any questions that you'd like to engage our panelists, if there are any comments. I'm going to come back to you, Rob, but I just want to take it back to the back. I'm going to take it back to the back. That rhymes. I could be a rapper. If anyone has a question or comment, I will start at the very back. Dorcas, is that you? Because I was going to ask you to speak anyway.
Okay. Thank you. I really want to appreciate the panelists for the wonderful presentations. I'm called Brenda Kugonza, and I lead an organization called Women Human Rights Defenders Network Uganda. And I have been a victim of attacks, including police raids because of the Anti-Homosexuality Act in Uganda, and we work closely with Dr. Adrian. One of the things I just wanted to comment is that right now, it appears as though there is progress because of the developments in court. It's not true. It's not true because we are seeing so many LGBTI community members, citizens in Uganda, not being able to access the following services. And not only the legal services, the medical services, the right to shelter, the right to food and education, and we are seeing increasing evictions in the country. And so for us, what we are saying, beyond the legal avenues, what is there for the LGBTI communities in terms of what is already biting? We are seeing non-state actors, community members who continue to persecute, who continue to discriminate, and also arrests are continuing to happen. And we are worried that even when the court actually nullifies the law, certain things are going to happen. And so, Dr. Adrian, this is something we are also watching because we are worried. In 2014, the same bill was there, and then it was nullified on grounds of technicalities. Right now, it is another agenda. But people are dying. People can't access services because of these actions. And so we need to be mindful on what we are going to do. But I also want to encourage us that beyond what we don't know, whether we are going to be successful with our campaign, we are also pursuing other avenues. We are going to the East African Court
Yes.
or others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brenda. I hope, Adrian, you were noting those comments. I'd like to bring it to the front here, the lovely lady in black.
Hi, thank you all for coming and being part of this panel. I guess I'll introduce myself. My name's Makta. I'm a student at Columbia working on food sovereignty research in the African context. And I guess I just wanted to sort of ask a question about how, in terms of talking about working within systems that are very actively trying to uproot and oppress like the mission of queer liberation and navigating within those systems from like an organizational perspective, how you were talking about the threat of like losing organizational licensure and what that would mean. I'm curious if you or any of the panelists have any examples of like strategies that you have found effective in situations where like organizations or like groups or coalitions have been forcibly disbanded or like their resources have been limited in some way, or some similar effect has happened, because we see that with a lot of organizations that we like are being disbanded or like having licenses taken away. What do we do after that? Are there effective strategies that you've seen play out before?
Thank you so much. That's an interesting question because I'm trying to register an NGO in Swaziland as well. The lady at the back, and then we'll bring it back to the panelists.
Hi, my name is Amanda Morale. I'm an Obama Foundation scholar at Columbia University. And my question is about coalition building. So I know a few panelists and participants like briefly touched on it, but I would love to hear more about like what does it mean to coalition build? Like who are you actually working with? I know one of the panelists talked about how allyship is super dangerous right now. So how are you navigating that and what does that look like in this context?
Interesting. Yes, one last one and then we'll bring it back.
Thank you. My name is Morgan. I work on legal support in Africa and other places with a group called Namati. Similar questions, building on a couple of these. There are so many pathways to how we win on the stage here and in the crowd, through litigation, through cultural and creative activism, through organizing, community organizing. I'd love to know more just about how y'all are weaving those pathways together. So when you're pursuing a case in court, how does organizing and other work in the political and cultural sphere help you? When you're trying to organize your community to build power, how do you lean on lawyers and the litigators? I'd just love to know more about that weaving that y'all are able to do. If I can throw a second one in there, I'd also love to know about your lovely scarves.
Well, I think I'm going to have to sell these scarves. They're so beautiful, aren't they? Thank you so much. But all I'm hearing is resources, resources, resources so that we can do more collaborative work. I'd like to bring it back to the podium if there are any comments and answers to what's been said. You can just go, whoever feels brave enough.
Okay, let me try to respond to the last question that came in terms of weaving and how are we working together, addressing some of all these challenges, religious challenges in terms of laws that are being enacted to undo the work that has been done. For me, my personal experience, when we started the work, we thought as experts, as lawyers, we have all the answers. But we realized over time that we don't know anything as lawyers. Actually, the answers are with the community themselves. They are the ones who hold the solutions to the problems. So we started listening to them more. So we are employing what we call legal empowerment strategies in our work as we litigate. So we no longer say, okay, there's a problem with the law. Now let's go to court. Let's find the best client and let's go to court. No, we listen to the communities. How are we supposed to handle this? Because at the end of the day, as we go to court, there is also a backlash that comes with litigating in court. And at the end of the day, these are human beings that are affected by the work that we're doing in the courtroom. Because when we are done in court, we go home, but yet they are the ones who face the backlash. So how do we ensure that they are protected? Then the answers remain with them. So it's by listening to them and say, how do we do with the problem? Do we go to court now or do we wait? Do we do advocacy now or do we wait? Or sometimes we don't even have to go to court. The strategy is not to go to court. It's just to engage different stakeholders, those that are key, building allies, like the question that came through, I think, from you, is how do we find partners within the people that are fighting against us? So to destabilize those that are fighting against us and finding allies within them, but those have to be led by the communities. Thank you.
Right. It's called fighting from within. Make friends with the enemy. Anyone who wants to respond? I think I like the question about, particularly because it's dangerous to be an ally right now. And I used to say, as a young activist, that the more you criminalize people, the more you make it difficult for those who are willing to be allies because they fear the backlash to themselves. So it's really a difficult play on how you balance that. But anyway, yes, Dr. Kohn.
Yeah, I just want to highlight one thing. There is this pattern, going back to what Jessica said, that we are winning. And when you are winning, generally the other group, if I'm talking about soccer, they have to put. You can continue to.
I hope it's not Manchester United, because
I don't like that team. Sorry, but the point I'm trying to raise here is you can win with the strikers, but if your defense, you change so much of your defense, what happens is that you're going to lose all the goals you scored. What is going on now is that the recent laws which are being debated and passed, if you have paid attention, they are criminalizing advocacy. That is not how it was before. It's because they have seen the wins that have taken place. So the best thing to do is to stop, keep quiet, don't talk about it. And more so it has to do with the stories, the narratives. The opposition wants us to argue in abstract. But now we are showing them this child would have been saved if we had opened space for abortion services. So what they're trying to do now is to say, don't talk about it, because that's the only way they are going to continue defending their turf. We have a choice to make, and this is again coming to Jessica's point, something that the international community can help with, but they cannot direct. Because what that does is it paints the picture that they are telling us what to do. We do have, someone said this, that they can kill all the LGBT persons and defenders, but as long as mothers continue to bear kids, this is the battle for us to win. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because what I've seen is that the opposition also tries to destabilize the alliances. And just as we plan to fight from within, they're also doing the same thing.
Right.
And what they tend to do is to say, oh, we accept these human rights, but not those human rights. Yeah. And also because of the funding at times, we tend to fall for that. And what that has done is that, in fact, I love because Jessica is here, I worked with Jessica. She understands me. But the point I want to say is, sometimes these divisions are brought up by the funders themselves.
Oh.
We have to face the reality here. By isolating, we can't support these rights. Right. We can only support those rights. Right. But we're talking about human rights here. If we are going to make a story about poverty, that story to me involves the LGBT person just as a street kid on the streets of Lusaka. And by the way, you know, Uganda has been on the map for so many years. But I can tell you, my country is Zambia. If the LGBT movement was to parade in Lusaka, they are dead.
It is a Christian nation, isn't it?
It is a Christian nation. So in as much as we want to put so much emphasis on Uganda, there are gays who are in prison in Zambia, right? So my point I'm raising is, this is a continental problem. Yeah. Let us use the Pan-African move to try and save the innocent lives that continue to disappear. And to those who think we talk so much about LGBT persons, I always say this: what can force a teenage kid to go and live in a refugee camp? If homophobia, transphobia, they are not real.
Thank you so much. I would like to send it back to you, Jessica, particularly because I'm interested in what Dr. Coleman says about the donor community. And I know I'm not putting you on the spotlight because of your position, but I'm just saying your thoughts around that. Is there some truth to that?
Is this mic working? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. A couple of things. What did I want to say first? To the colleague, I think the person came from this side of the room, who said, who asked, how do you build coalitions and allies when allyship is increasingly criminalized? I just want to say, I think this room and this organization is a testament to the fact that allies are still coming forward and allies are still brave. And without, declaring anyone's identities, I'd say some of the greatest champions that I know of LGBTQI rights are straight and cisgendered people who are putting their neck on the line. So can we give a round of applause for all the allies out there, please? Malusi, I'm glad you asked the question, and I want to link it with, I think it was Morgan's question about weaving strategies together. So in my role, I'm not a donor, I'm a policymaker, but I have access to donor spaces. And I think Morgan's question, how do you weave pathways together like litigation and community organizing, is a really resonant one for me. I don't think you can win with just one strategy. Right. I mean, we all have learned from the example of South Africa. South Africa has one of the strongest constitutions in the world, but the promise of the law and its implementation are two very different realities. So if we don't actually ensure that there's community organizing, changing public narratives, creating access to social services, the whole intersectional picture of support, then we don't win. And I do think there's donor pressure to sort of define your niche, right? Yeah. You're the parliamentary group, you're the litigation group, and never the twain shall meet. And I know there's some amazing donors in the audience who buck that trend, but I just want to say, when you're meeting with the donor and they're trying to ask you to choose a single issue approach, it is okay to challenge them. It is okay to tell your truth, and it is okay because you are the experts who know exactly what's going to be effective. Absolutely. And I think SALC is a really great example of this. Right. I don't know exactly what your focus was when you started, but Southern African Litigation Center is a pretty specific name. I'd assumed that when you started, you declared yourselves to be litigators. Right. But as you've done the work, it's just expanded exponentially in ways that we've all learned so much from.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's like what Chikondi said earlier, because the experts are the ones on the ground and not us doing the work. I'd like to ask Rob to say something, and then I'll settle back to Annika.
Yeah, I want to, a lot of thoughts are swirling through my head as I hear the different comments here, so I'm just going to quickly go down the line and start with Chikondi. Thank you for your comments. I think that's something we're learning here, and I want to preface my comments by saying I'm speaking as a resident of a country that doesn't believe in human rights, a country that is so proud of saying that Eleanor Roosevelt helped draft this document, but yet we don't teach it in school. I had to learn it as an organizer and a community activist. So I thank you. And I think it's important for us to learn from those movements abroad, and I use the term internationalism and solidarity. Right? We need to practice it because we organize in silos here. This is a critical indictment of social movements in the U.S. We have the same exceptionalist attitude towards human rights that our government does, and it filters down. So the way we change that is by learning from countries who have lifted themselves up by using the human rights mechanism. Dr. Adrian, I do think, and I'm speaking again from the context of the U.S., the only social change we've ever achieved in this country is by direct action and civil disobedience, intentionally breaking laws that worked against us, right? And I think people have to understand that you have to take risks to make certain social change. So, that's part of organizing, and that's what we teach in organizing. So it's important that we learn that. I do believe, I don't have the same optimism, and again, I'm speaking from the context of the US. I do think it's important, again, for us to learn from other countries. My focus was on housing and land acquisition because I'm formerly homeless. So my human rights work started there, but I started understanding that human rights is about needs and, you know, the need of food security, somebody talked about here, right? The need for health care and all these other things, access to water. I worked in Detroit and Flint back in 2014 around those issues. But I don't share the same optimism that you do, and maybe it's important that I continue to learn from what is happening outside of the US, right? I also work strongly in Brazil, and I'm learning from activists and organizers on the ground in those two countries how important this internationalism is and solidarity is. And I want to say to everybody here who is based here in New York or based here in the United States, solidarity is more than, you know, signing a petition. Yeah. It's putting your body on the line on behalf of that group and building those coalitions that everybody keeps talking about in this room.
We call it social media activism. Everybody is behind a keypad being an activist.
There you go.
Annika, and then I'm going to come back to you,
Thank you.
Dr. Arya.
As I was listening to the comments and the feedback, it struck me that we came back to speaking mostly about LGBTQ rights. That was not the intention of the meeting. Not that I'm saying it always ends up that way.
You put a gay man on the stage, so.
No, but to be fair, and we didn't introduce Malusi properly, but Malusi started off as a gay rights activist, litigating on the registration of his own organization. And he's graduated to defending so-called terrorists who are democracy activists. You know, like it's because you start realizing that it's not just about gay rights. And I think there's a very big danger, and the danger comes from the international community, from donors, who start saying, oh, you know, like every conversation goes back to Uganda, it goes back to the LGBTQ rights, and we have a much bigger problem than that. Right. We get funding on LGBTQ rights, if I have to be open, from the US Department of State. We're not allowed to speak about sex workers' rights under that same grant. We're not allowed to mention that we defend terrorists who are human rights defenders, but criminalized under the terrorism laws that are actually brought by the United States into all our countries. There's a lot of things we cannot do, but somehow we can speak about LGBTQ rights. And I think Adrian, Chikondi, everyone else, you faced exactly the same challenges. It's these sort of discrepancies, and somehow, and what I've seen over the years, we've allowed certain stigmas to continue because of how it is framed. And it happens even within the human rights community, because when we started giving funding to LGBTQ groups under the guise of HIV funding and whatever else, you started stigmatizing them as they the cause of HIV. We also, at the same time, as LGBTQ rights movements grow, get increased funding, women's rights movements in Africa are at the bottom level. They've all lost funding. They basically working on no resources whatsoever. You know, like, so it's those sort of things. And then organizations and rights and movements start competing against each other when what it's all about is the universality of rights. And I think the way in which we've allowed identity politics and other things to guide the discourse is we've made it all about it's about me and about my issues, instead of speaking about all of us have rights. Right. And if I can relate it back to Lisa and I used to work together on gender-based violence and HIV, right at the time when those issues were burning issues in South Africa. And the country had really beautiful laws around domestic violence, sexual offenses, maintenance, all those sort of things. But the way in which the laws immediately in the new democracy were articulated is they were articulated as these are laws for women. The way men and communities understood that was that it's taking away my rights and giving rights to women. So what happened was that the way in which the laws were introduced made them more polarizing instead of actually showing that we're now on an equal footing. And we're constantly doing that. That's what was mentioned around how LGBTQ rights are articulated as they want special rights. It's not about, but we've allowed that discourse to happen in the way we ourselves frame it. And that's really, I think, why we wanted to come here also at this stage, because you all are international players. Right. And there's a role that you play in how the discourse are being framed. We say that across Africa, LGBT people are criminalized. No, people are not criminalized. Certain acts are criminalized. If we say people are criminalized, we're buying into that narrative, right. Which then means they cannot have organizations. You know, like it sort of leads to other things. We say sex workers are criminalized. To be honest, sex work is not a crime anywhere in Africa, apart from South Africa. But by using, but the police think it is because we've said that it is. Right. You know, like we ourselves contribute to the discourse that's actually damaging our own stuff. So I just wanted to raise that, and I think this issue of what Rob mentioned about, or Liesl mentioned about human rights defenders versus human rights enforcers. Yes, it's how we articulate things, and I think sometimes, speaking to power as we are in New York, I think it's a responsibility that we have to take very carefully, because all of those things come tumbling down back to us in Africa in a way that then is completely subverted from what the initial intention was. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. I'd just like to do something quickly. Is Dorcas in the room? I'm conscious of time. Is Dorcas Mwango in the room? Yes, I am sorry to put you on the spot, Lala. I told you the whole Swati colloquialization of the language, Kubulala. So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you one simple question that was asked in there. I think it was Jessica who made mention of the whole conversation around governments listening when civil society speaks to them. So I'd just like to pick your brain on that, if you could introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Dorcas Mwango. I work at the Malawi Mission here in New York. I was invited by Aneki on LinkedIn. I don't know how, but I just got an invitation. I said, okay, if I'm free, I'll make sure that So that's why I'm here this morning or this afternoon. Yeah, it's so interesting to learn so much from all the panelists and all the participants. I'm not in the human rights field. I'm in the economic affairs field, but yeah. So, but I'm learning a lot. I've learned a lot from how people perceive issues of LGBTQ and how governments, like like I'm from Malawi, I know that it's a very sensitive issue. I believe my dear Chikondi, she can agree with me. Well, she's a lawyer. She's in the human rights, so she knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. So it's something that is not open to be talked about, and people are very sensitive about it. Yeah. And myself being a government official, I also don't normally talk or share how I feel about it. It's personal, I know, but as a diplomat as well, I have some limits on how I can freely express my feeling about it. So,
I'm glad you're an ally today.
Yes, yeah. So that's what I can say. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very conscious of time, so can you please take 2 minutes, gentlemen at the front, and then I'll hand it back to Ben.
Thanks. Brett Davidson. I'm a consultant working on narrative change, and I work with IRIS, International Resource for Impact and Storytelling. I'd love to come back to this idea of that you talked about, Liesl, about the artists and the storytellers, because when you talked about this issue of siloing, I think storytellers are the people who can help us connect all the threads, right? You can tell stories about issues that help us connect, or, because it's stories about people's lives. And in people's lives, things about gender and economics and food and all these things, climate and racial justice, connect in our lives. And I think storytellers can help us weave those stories together. So I think, and they can help us then tell those stories to funders and show us how all these things are connected, and we need to fund outside those issue silos. And I just want to say one more quick thing about this issue of why LGBT rights are everybody's rights. And I love the idea of why connecting it to rights of other minority people, but I think there's a more direct connection, which is those laws are not directed at policing LGBT people. They're directed at policing everybody. because you now walk down the street and you don't want to be mistaken for a gay person, so you're going to behave in a certain way. We've seen in the US, for example, a young girl who had a boyish haircut being investigated for being trans. And so those laws are being used to police everybody's behavior because you don't want to be suspected of being one of those people who are now criminalized. And so there's a direct impact on everybody's life, everybody's behavior, and everyone is now suspect because you might be one of those people. So it's not even that that's like those laws about those people, it's policing, it's being used to police all of us. And I think we should bear that.
It's the patriarchy, isn't it?
Yeah.
There you go. Thank you so much. Ben, if you allow me, I'll take one last question here and then I'll hand it back to you. Oh, since there are two people now. Unless you take 30 seconds each.
Hello, my name is Jennifer McCarthy. I'm with an organization called Parliamentarians for Global Action. So we're a network of legislators in 150 countries working on human rights, democracy, inclusion, and equality. So clearly the anti-gender, anti-democracy movement is learning from each other across countries. But we like to show good, achievable examples to our parliamentarians so they can see what their peers in other countries are doing and try to replicate that in their own countries. So I'm wondering if you have any good examples of protecting civic space on the legislative side, or any specific actions that are achievable that parliamentarians can take in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Melissa Verpil, so I'm with Parliamentarians for Global Action. And my question really was, in African countries where we see a trend toward the adoption of similar legislation as that of Uganda's, which has very serious ramifications, as we've heard the panelists talk about, have civil society organizations in these countries been systematically identifying and engaging with legislators or other government officials who may also be worried about the anti-rights, anti-gender trends as they affect more than just LGBTQI plus persons. You know, they affect education, health, sustainable development goals, really. And I wonder if civil society organizations have maybe strategically engaged them on intersectionalities that, you know, especially the economy. We hear a lot of politicians talk about the economy and how, you know, they use that a lot. And so if you don't integrate, if you don't include, you know, women, LGBTQI plus persons, so you're alienating from economic empowerment and economic participation a huge group of people. So I wonder what are the strategies civil society organizations have used to engage with legislators, and if they have done so at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have an answer to either of those questions to begin with, to kick off? Anyone itching? Go for it.
Maybe the earlier ones asked, just to point out, Brenda, thank you for raising issues around the broader implications of the Administrative Rights Act in Uganda. But I want to deal with the issue of deregistration a little bit more specifically. Like what happens? I've been giving a lot of thought to that because deregistration may happen to my organization very soon. And what happens if that happens? It's a difficult one. But for me, I think what happens is that we have to start thinking, that is us and also donors and others, beyond NGOs in some ways. Because if NGOs become centers of attack, they become very vulnerable. But then how do you continue funding? How do you continue supporting work which is being done by an NGO? That's something that right now SMAG, Minorities Uganda, is grappling with in Uganda, and they continue to do their work, but without being an NGO because they have failed to register, and also they have been formally, essentially deregistered. So it's something you have to think about. How do we de-NGOize the work that we are doing? How do we support activists without them exactly being under NGOs? Because that has become something that has led to vulnerability in certain ways.
Thank you. Anyone else want to answer those questions that we just posed?
Yeah, I think, for me, I would like to respond to the issue of involvement of parliamentarians. I've seen it in Malawi in the fight for the fighting against the death penalty. We have seen a movement within civil society getting together, engaging parliamentarians to move for a private member bill. But it's not just about that. The experience has been that when you're engaging parliamentarians, it becomes an expensive exercise because they are coming from their constituencies, when you have to engage them, you have to bring them together. There's a lot of resources that come to bringing parliamentarians together. So it's also about putting more resources in that kind of work because it's quite expensive to do that. But also what I've seen is also how the community themselves have been able to engage parliamentarians by using their voting power to bring the change. We saw it when we were advocating for the HIV bill in Malawi, where they had introduced part of the provisions in the bill where it was mandatory for certain people to undergo HIV testing, including sex workers, domestic workers, and it took the community themselves to speak to power and say, if you are going to include these kind of provisions, then it means you are actually making us go underground, not get tested, and then the numbers of people that are HIV positive will start going up. And it was them speaking to the parliamentarians that moved the change, because they had to go to Parliament when Parliament was debating the bill. They were there in their T-shirts, women living with HIV, and say, we want these provisions out of the bill. And it was one of the most powerful things that I've seen in my life, seeing people making change right there and then. And parliamentarians, when they were debating in Parliament, they removed all those provisions. So sometimes it's more effective when the community is more involved than the NGOs. Thank you. And yes, Victor obviously has to add something.
Yeah, just to mention also that we have also engaged the president in various ways. For example, we have asked the president to release the prisoners because the prisoners, they are lacking food in Malawi prisons. As we are talking, there's congestion. You know, the Malawi prison was meant for 5,000 plus prisoners, but it's keeping up to 17,000 prisoners. So we have gone directly as organizations, writing the president. We find that the president can pardon some prisoners and reduce the sentence of the prisoners. We have managed that several times. And also we have had some students who have excelled. These are prisoners who have excelled in prison. We also wrote the president. This has never happened in Malawi. We wrote the president released them. So you can see the way we are doing it. There's goodwill, but all what we need is maybe to coordinate and then keep on working as a team. Yeah.
Thank you. Any answers to protecting civic spaces? Any good examples? I think that may also speak to where we're at in the world right now in terms of good examples of protecting our spaces and our rights. Does anyone have anything maybe from the African continent? Nope. Nope, nope, nope. No worries.
I think I'll speak to that a bit. Because I've heard this language being used, like defending democracy, and my question is, what happens when there's no democracy in those spaces? And you know, because I've heard it, we like repeating terms without thinking through them. So in Africa, Malawi is a good case to think about, but it's when we have a friendly president who is also very concerned about the anti-human rights movement, probably even defeating him, using it as a political thing. So these presidents, the African presidents or parliamentarians who side with the movement, the human rights movement, they are doing it at a cost. And most of the times, as someone, Jessica, again, thank you for teaching me how to go through the embassy's lobbying, is what one of the ambassadors asked us this question. If I support LGBT and women's rights, can your community assure me that come the election year, we'll get the vote? And the answer is usually no. And the reason is because we haven't seen ourselves as also political actors organizing for the values that we uphold. So it's time for us to start thinking in Africa that there are many people who hear our story and feel for those stories. Thank you for the narrative part. In fact, my writings have moved from abstract theories to just telling stories of how people experience poverty, experience discrimination in various parts of Africa. On the economic front, if I may answer this, there is myth that, I'm stealing from Jessica, but the myth is this, that if you start supporting LGBT persons, then you are a billionaire, all right? So there's an economic assumption that puts the LGBT and women's rights as getting a lot of millions, when in actual fact, it is those very corrupt governments that the US continues to fund anyway. But they use that whenever there is a problem, they will say, oh, we are suffering like this because of the LGBT movement. So the economic aspect is important to be placed on the table, but you also have to understand that it can become a big myth, all right? When there are sanctions, they blame it on a small group of people. So the international community also should know how to package some of these policies so as not to out the vulnerable people as the reasons why those countries are suffering.
Thank you. I'm very aware that we're going to need to wrap up. So at that point, I'm going to thank our panelists. Thank you so, so much. Can we have a round of applause to the panelists, please? Thank you. And I'm sure there'll be networking opportunities after and online as well, so we can all mix and mingle and discuss our views. I am going to pass to Ian now to close this and give some closing remarks. So thank you very much.
I am not sure how you close a panel like this, but yeah, it's been a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much to all the panelists. We are here as part of a celebration, right? We're celebrating 75 years of the UDHR. And while it is a wonderful, wonderful instrument, I think it's also important that we must recognize its shortcomings. The UDHR feels a bit, to me at least, almost like a one-size-fits-all kind of document. And we are not one-size-fits-all, right? As queer communities, as communities with disability, Indigenous communities, we know that we need to do more work for some than for others. And so I think it is up to us in this room to make sure the document is interpreted in a way that makes sense. So that is going to be very, very important. When on the African continent we first became aware of the sort of anti-gender, anti-rights movement that was happening, it felt very, very far away because it was happening across East Europe. And we kind of thought, okay, not our problem, right? And then all of a sudden, one day, it was everywhere, even in places that we thought we had won. Places like Namibia, places like Botswana, places like Ghana, which was really where you had many wonderful pro-rights, African feminist-based. In these places, we actually thought we had won, and we had made the tick behind our names, and we had moved on. And in those very spaces today, we see how the anti-movement, anti-gender rights people are really organizing, using our very own language against us, right? It's about women's rights, it's about family rights, except they define it very differently. One of the words that came up a lot here is that of intersectionality, the word. And I think it's going to be incredibly important that we define what that means. We have seen with intersectionality that when we start talking about how women's rights must be funded intersectionally, then often the funds disappear, right? So we move it from a women's rights pot into this intersectional pot, but the intersectional pot is a little bit amorphic, and we're not always sure where the money goes to, but I can promise you one thing, it's not going to women's rights organizations. So what is happening? I do just want to briefly say, because I'm very aware that we must be out of here by 1, that as those in the donor world, we do need to think very differently. So we're asking our partners, please do a 3, a 4, a 5-year strategy. The truth is that by the end of the week, when your strategy is done, it's also outdated because the world has shifted so much. Activists really find that they go to bed in one country and wake up in another country because the laws have changed during the night, or there was a proposed law that came up during the night. And so as those in the donor community, we kind of need to think differently about it, because the log frame, the multiple year strategy, it's simply not working anymore. I do think, and it came up a lot, that we work in silos, right? We ask partners, what is your niche? How are you working differently? What's unique about you? And how are you different from A, B, C, and D? The truth is that people have to adopt so fast in a world that is incredibly fast-paced that I'm not sure that is a fair question. Organizations are constantly having to reinvent themselves to meet the moment. And so I'm asking for funding that is really flexible and funding that is really, as much as it can be, without conditions. On the African continent, we see another really important instrument really under threat, and that is the Maputo Protocol, right? That really we need to have the fight around women's rights. And if you look at what is currently happening and how family is being defined, the Maputo Protocol is under direct attack by the people that you think would be there to support it. So progressive rights simply isn't on the table. I want to agree with whoever said, was it you, Jess, that said that part of the losses that we see is because of our successes. Absolutely. We need to claim that because it's true. And when you have many successes, as the queer community has, we sometimes forget that the backlash can also come, and it can be as bad as the celebrations. It can be equal to the celebrations of the winnings that we've had. I want to agree with Brett. I do think it's an old method, but it's tried and it's tested. It's about winning hearts and about winning minds. And there, storytelling has become incredibly important. And it's amazing how we go 360, because a while ago it wasn't the most innovative way for people to work, through storytelling. And now we find that we're going back there because we need people to tell their authentic stories, their unique stories, the stories that no one can refute. I think that is incredibly important. And so yes, where we were talking about what we were talking about 14 years ago, that sort of went out of style for many of us, it's right back where we started. We are not right back where we started. There are more countries that have decriminalized. There's enhanced criminalization for queer communities that affects everyone. But do not lose hope, because truthfully, if we look back at where we were 20 years ago, there's been a lot of backlash, but we're still ahead of where we were, and so I think progress is still to be made. I want to say thank you very much to the panelists that came out today, Salk for a brilliant gathering of organizing, and no, I did not try and wrap up the panel, because I don't think a panel like that can be wrapped up. So thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you.